The issue with the pensions was an ongoing issue. So what you voted on, will that resolve the issue?
Well, you know, there's not a lot of savings in what we passed. You know, the sick days cost us about, I think, about $30 million a year. So, and that over time will you know, reduce. The big savings is on going to the hybrid cash balance, and what it does, it doesn't show a lot of savings, but what it does over the years, it doesn't create an unfunded liability, and that's where we need to go. We don't want to obligate future generations. You know, it's going to take us 30 years to pay off the debt we already have. We just don't want to accumulate any more debt going forward. We want to pay off what we got,
right,
and go forward. So that's why the hybrid cash balance. And the I think the shared responsibility plan does the same thing, because it pretty well guarantees that the state only has to pay 6% into that plan. But the big thing was to stop the digging. So, but really, the only thing that gets us out of this mess we're in is a lot of money. We're now in this budget that we have now, $3.8 billion going to retirement. It's about 15% of our budget now. We have three things that have just been growing, and really difficult to control their growth. Pension spending, and a lot of that is the fact that we haven't made the payments in the past that we should have, and a big part of it too is the way we're calculating them. We really weren't paying the interest, so we were accumulating unfunded liabilities even on what we were paying on, because of the percentage of payroll calculation. So it's just going to take a lot of money to pay these debts that we owe, and we're financing it over 30 years. We got about somewhere, you know, it just depends who you ask. Some will say we have a $40 billion unfunded liability, and some will use a different figure and say we have a $60 billion unfunded liability. Doesn't matter which one you use, it's a lot of money. And the only way we get out of it, is with putting in the budget more money and paying into these systems to pay that unfunded liability down. And if we don't, you know, KERS is right now sits at 13% funded. You know, if we're not careful and we don't, you know, I think we're going in the right direction with them. We'll be putting in more money now every year than what they're paying out, because we're putting in $700 million additional into KERS this year, because we went from percentage of payroll to level dollar, and that's our increased contribution we had to make, and that's in Senate Bill 151. That's our increased contribution we had to make because of that commitment. So we had to dig our way out, and the only way you can do that is to more money. And I told you that other things that we couldn't, that keep growing and we really have a difficult time controlling the cost, is cost for our prisons. You know, we passed House Bill 463 several years ago with the thought that our prison population was growing, and it got to 20,000. We passed this House Bill 463 thinking that we could slow down our growth and stay at 20,000. That was a good number, and try to stay there. We're probably approaching 26,000 inmates right now as we speak, and that are state inmates. That doesn't count the ones in the county jails waiting to be arraigned or waiting for sentencing. So that is difficult to control those costs, and it costs us between $30 and $35 a day to house prisoners at the local jail, and it costs us quite a bit more to house them at the state prisons, because the state prisons are, I guess, a little more secure, and are they're, some of them are maximum security, and so You just have more cost in the state prisons. The other thing that we have a real problem in controlling the cost is Medicaid. You know, right now we have about one in 3 people in Kentucky is covered by Medicaid, and you know that's a good thing on one hand. We have all these people that are these citizens that are getting health care. On the other hand, the federal government on some of them is paying 90% and will be paying up to 10%. But some of them are the federal government's paying 70%, we're paying 30%. So, and the thing about Medicaid, if somebody qualifies, they qualify. And if they qualify, you have to pay the bill. So it's really difficult to budget for that. You know, we can put money in, we can say we think we know what Medicaid costs will be, but it's just it's a moving target, and it's something that grows every year. So that's an increasing part of our budget, and we've gone through budget cuts. I guess since 2008, we've made a lot of budget cuts, and you know, the state government is a lot leaner now than what it was in 2008. It also has fewer employees than it had in 2008.
So you had talked about, I think since we've been doing interviews for maybe 15 years, or how long has it been?
I've been about 16th
year. Since we've been doing these 16 years. We talked about tax reform, and so
we have.
But yeah,
we
so
have.
This budget was a start at that. Do you see more of that coming?
This is tax reform light. We didn't do a whole lot, and primarily one reason is Kansas did tax reform several years ago, and we've read about them. They tried to do too much too fast, and so they got in trouble. And what's going to happen with this reform? Once we roll it out and it's out there, we're going to find some issues with it, and we can go back and fix them when we go into session next year. And so it's and hopefully this is successful. Then we can look again at some other things we can expand our tax base to, and further reduce our personal income tax and our corporate income tax. One thing that we'll be looking at during the interim, Senate Bill 151 has language in it to direct us to have an interim committee that looks at tax exemptions. We exempt as much as we tax, Gary. We have about $13 billion in exemptions. So that will probably be the next wave of reductions. We'll go through those exemptions and see if we can't get rid of, find some that are no longer necessary.
Okay. So it's a process that will be continuing.
It's an ongoing process, yes, sir. And we need, as we've talked before, we need a tax code or tax system that grows with our economy. Our current system is not growing like it should, and because we put a lot of emphasis on sales tax on goods, and that's being eroded by mail order or online shopping. And now, there is a case, interestingly enough, there is a case before the Supreme Court this year that will deal with whether or not states can charge sales tax on internet sales. And if that happens, if that's the Supreme Court says yes, states can do that, that will be additional revenue for the state if we collect that sales tax, and would kind of reverse this not downward trend, but just not a lot of growth in our sales tax.
Well, it's actually, if you do get something or from another state or whatever online, you're supposed to report that, self-report it anyway.
That's correct.
And pay taxes.
That's correct. And that's difficult for people to keep up with, and you'd have to be a very organized person to do that. So, but yes, that's
technically that's supposed to be how it works.
And a lot of again, a lot of people look at Tennessee, our neighbor to the south, and see how their economy is growing, and you know, their poverty rate's a lot lower than Kentucky's, and you know, we see their population growing faster than Kentucky's, and you know, I think there's, you know, that, and we look at their tax model. We also look at Indiana; their poverty level is lower than Kentucky's, and you know, their economy is growing. Also, Kentucky's economy is growing, but not as fast as we'd like for it to.
So again, I've been talking with State Senator Jimmy Higdon about the legislative session, which is still ongoing, and then hopefully in a few weeks maybe we'll get together again and see what actually is going to be a law and what's not, and talk about the new bills that have been passed at that point after we can get through the veto session. After
tax day,
right.
Which is really, it's not April 15th because that falls on a Sunday. It's April the 17th.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe after the 15th we'll be able to get together.
Sounds good.
Gary, in closing, I wanted to say, you know, there's been some negative comments made in the press about teachers, and I just, you know, I don't condone that. I have a great deal of respect for teachers and state employees, so I just wanted to be on record saying that. And also, you know, they've been to Frankfurt. They've assembled and let their voices be heard, and you know, I support that too. I commend them for using their First Amendment right, and I also commend them for participating in the process. I think it's very important that, and they've made you know, they have pushed the needle on what we do in Frankfurt, because they have been very active, and so we appreciate that.
And I'm here with State Senator Jimmy Higdon. This is Gary White for Channel 6 on Kentucky Television.